Hello, everyone, and welcome to Retrospective Rants, with me, Joey Huff, as your host. Today, we're going to speak of art. Not artsiness, just actual art. Still not convinced? Uh-huh. Let me try to explain then. Art is meant to be the expression of the individual to an audience. A great artist can make something that pulls at the common root of expression in other people. They will then understand this, the audience will understand this, and then feel understood by the work, the artwork that's being made, and then they will perfect that moment by seeking to understand the individual, that meaning the individual artist, and their work, the artwork, that is. It's a cooperative exercise. Alright, to add some perspective, think on those times when you encountered that moment. If you were a creator of a particular piece, whether it was a story, a picture, maybe you even tried your hand at making a whole graphic novel, or even a few panels, and someone said, "What inspired you to make this?" Or they asked, "What were you feeling when you drew this?" An equivalent to that moment, but from the audience's perspective, or the viewer's perspective, would be when you get lost in your own thoughts over a particular piece. You might wonder why an artist chose a particular shade of that color, why they chose those words to describe a person or location, or why an action scene is shot that way, or, well, the list goes on. And as you are lost in those thoughts, you begin to connect with not just the image, but the crafting of the image. You join, or rather rejoin, the artist in the making of whatever art that they made. It is the definition of a cooperative exchange, and it's what most artists dedicate their entire lives to achieve. And you know what? If both the artist and the viewer are in the same room or together during one of these moments, there may even be a point where the artist discovers something in the work that they didn't consciously intend. But when their attention is pointed towards that aspect, something new is discovered. And so the universality, the art of the piece, is expanded even further, and that's because the maker, the witness, and the thing itself, the creation, all grow due to this exchange of feeling, thought, and motive. But, in my experience, art is rarely seen that way, especially these days. These days, artists are trained, and indeed conditioned, to treat art as a hammer to shape others into something else, to shape the audience into something else. And it's not for the sake of discovery, but to achieve a predetermined goal, and the goal is usually of a materialistic or political nature. But that is not solely the fault of modern artists so much as modern education entire. Now, when I started university, I was not alone in being awash with feelings of excitement and fear. I knew what I wanted to do, but there was a lot of work to do. And to compound it all, I was living alone among strangers. Oddly enough, I felt more vulnerable as an adult than I did as a child in grade school. And like many vulnerable people, I looked for guidance in this unfamiliar environment. But that was the extent of my need. What I did not expect was the amount of people looking for guidance in everything. What does that mean? Above the office for my school was a plaque with the phrase, and I'll paraphrase this in the interests of maintaining what little privacy I can. But the phrase was, art is not only a mirror to reflect society, but a hammer to shape it. Now, that's a very powerful phrase, and it's a very poisonous philosophy to espouse. But why? And what does that even have to do with modern education? Modern education teaches us to write and think a certain way. Well, it tries to teach us to think and write a certain way. Teachers need to read many essays and many reports, and they try to teach us, with increasing desperation, to write and think concisely. Students do not want to write essays, they really don't, and so they find the easiest formula that they can find and stick to it. And yet even then, we struggle to do that well. So what does that mean for the arts, especially for storytelling? Well, writing to achieve a concrete goal and writing to tell an organic story are not the same thing. The same techniques that help you write a business proposal or defend an argument are not the same techniques that make a great work of art, and they are certainly not the same techniques that make us feel entertained. In fact, when we see those techniques employed in storytelling, especially in movies or shows, we call those pieces formulaic, and we very often dislike them. Now, this is different from a story that features popular tropes or generalized structures, and explaining those differences would require another episode. For simplicity's sake, let's say something like the hero's journey is the skeleton of a story, and hopefully everything within it is something more human and original. Whereas most modern stories place the guts in with no structure at all and very little that's original, and then everything comes spilling out. You get it. It's a big mess and very few people like it. But how does that happen? First off, people are making art not to express a truth from themselves or how they felt in the moment of making whatever art piece, but instead they're trying to prove a point to others, and this affects the flow of the story. Because rather than letting the story flow organically, and rather than letting the characters develop independently, everything is dedicated to prove a point. Characters are no longer people. They're caricatures at best. But they are always made with the purpose of highlighting whatever the artist is trying to prove. They are sentences and body paragraphs made to support a thesis, just like in a grade school essay. But how did the arts arrive at such a state? Why did we feel the need to prove that we can shape the material world in the same way as engineering or economics or politics? The material world is the issue. For all our advancements, it seems that time is one luxury that we in the so-called developed world do not appreciate. Everything must have an easily and quickly discernible purpose, one whose benefits are immediate and certainly not something as esoteric or particular as the inner good. After all, spirituality is kinda cute, but it doesn't put food on the table or print money, does it? And so, because the material benefit is not so apparent, we are made to come up with a material use for art. The craft itself is no longer the focus. The thing itself is no longer precious unless it serves a specific and useful end, specifically a materialistic end. Now, art at its most basic state creates feelings. And so, to fit in the professional and utility-based world, people are taught that their art must be made to compel a feeling towards the direction of whatever might make money or forward a public and utilitarian agenda, or just a agenda, meaning whatever is the hot topic. This comes at the cost of making the story fun, human, or just any type of captivating, but that doesn't matter, because the powerful creatures of the world want those tools as weapons in their arsenal, and they want artists to be the willing and foolish soldiers that wield them. That's what modern art is, and that's what I have to contend against. And that's another rant over and done, but it's also a rant that, stuck to my heart for a long while. For someone who dedicates themselves to any vocation, it's important that they feel their chosen path is of value, not just to them, but to other people. And so it's very easy to fall into the trap of pursuing any path that creates those feelings for oneself, especially when it comes to something as abstract as the creative arts. But we must remember the truth of the matter, the thing in and of itself, as Aurelius would say, or the sculpture beneath the stone, as Michelangelo would say. Whatever lesson you take from this, I hope you enjoyed listening to another retrospective rant. Thank you so much, and have a good one.